We have this Swedish session is in two parts because I represent one organization and Hanna, who will take the stage later, represents another organization. So we are splitting it up in two parts. And the first, I promised you that I would dive a bit into the Nordic EdTech beef, or the Nordic educational beef, because this is a question. In the Nordics, we always compete with each other, but we do it sometimes in a friendly way and sometimes in a not so friendly way. And I could just say that Sweden is double the size of inhabitants than Finland, double the size of inhabitants than Norway, double the size of the inhabitants of Denmark. So we have this big brother complex, the other countries say, that we always think we are better and, you know, that we know best. So let's see how that works, really. I represent the Swedish EdTech industry, which is a trade association that we have 80 member companies, everything from EdTech startups to established publishers to system administrative suppliers, and also the large international giants like Google and Microsoft are members because they're really big in the Swedish market. And we started 3 years ago, so it's kind of a new trade association. And at the same time, during that time, we try to figure out what is the value for our members, the best value for our members. What are we going to do as an association? So we have been working a lot with building value networks in order to strengthen innovation and growth. And innovation because we need to innovate this area. We have a lot of bad EdTech or badly implemented EdTech out there. And we also want growth, of course, since it's companies we're talking about. Growth is one of the main incitments for investments in innovation, for example. So we have been working a lot with these questions, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we have been doing, give a really, really short history of the Swedish educational system, and then I'm also going to dive into the Nordic perspective to see what happened. I'm going to talk about for 20 minutes. So the Swedish educational system, this is a really short overview of the latest 30 years of digitalization of the Swedish education system. And as you see, we have a very highly decentralized education system with over 600 school owners, which can be municipalities or free school owners. And since the 80s, we have been working with digital competence in Swedish compulsory school system. In the 80s, all kids were mandatory programming when it was go to 10 something. I remember it, but I didn't, something like that. And we had a couple of state level initiatives on that scene in the 80s and in the 90s. And then we have a gap here for like almost 30 years when we hit the first national digital strategy for Swedish school system in 2 years ago, which is really, really late. What happened during that time is the most interesting. We have the gap of 30 years here, is that 2017, a year before the strategy came, we were one of the most digitalized school system in the world. We have a technology penetration in schools that equals that kids in between 12 to 18 years old have a computer each or a tablet each or a device. So we have a high degree of technology penetration. So what happened during those years and what was the consequences of not having a national digital strategy? And the consequences was that inequity. We have large differences between schools, between classrooms, between competence in teachers. And this is a very good step from the Swedish government to really launch the national digital strategy with the mandatory need that all kids should develop and have the right to develop digital competence. So this is an equity question in my concern. So I think it's a good thing that we have the rush, the need for the schools that are lagging behind to get on board the train. So this is the background. So we're one of the most digitalized school system in the world. And then 2018, we were appointed the number 10 most interesting tech hub city in the world. Like 1, 2, and 3 were Beijing, New York, and blah, blah, blah. But Stockholm were number 10. This of 20. And this pissed Oslo, Helsinki, and Copenhagen really, really hard. And we loved it. And the thing is, what they were looking at in this was that what kind of support system and ecosystem is behind the success factor of Stockholm. Because Stockholm doesn't have, they looked at investments, and we have almost no investments, very little investments in Stockholm EdTech system. As you see, no exits. So the money factor was not the one. The one factor was that we have a lot of companies, a lot of innovative new companies starting, and we also have built out educational system. So they took a look at many parameters. But one thing they really said to me was that you are connected with Helsinki and Oslo and Copenhagen, and we could only give the prize to one, because it's the networking and the opportunities for your small countries that work together so tight that is. And Stockholm was the largest city, so they appointed us. So it is really a Nordic prize, I would say, or prize. It was an appointment, and this was interesting. And I'm going to talk a little bit about building value networks in the Nordics. And now I'm going to the Nordic perspective. The Nordic countries are more similar than we are different when it comes to our regulation of schools, the funding of schools, everything, and also the values that are in the curriculums. So we are more alike than we're different. So it's really relevant to talk about the Nordic school system. And when we look at PISA, we have the Nordic countries in the green field. We also have a highly acclaimed educational system around the world because of the PISA rankings. And we're lucky this year because Sweden rose from, we were here, now Norway switched down to here, but it's like just the points up and down. But we have that kind of reputation. So that is something that is connecting us. This is the Stockholm example. We are also countries with a high degree of innovation. Sometimes it's Stockholm that's number one, sometimes it's Helsinki. So it's just different, but we're up there, all of us. So we have a high degree of innovation in our societies and in our economies. And I know that you want to talk about Estonia.
I'm not sure about the Skype there.
I know.
Patent of Skype is still in Estonian patent office.
I know. So it's part Swedish, part Estonian. But these are an example of a couple of companies coming out of Stockholm the last couple of 10 years. High technology, user-friendly, gaming industry, very much like Helsinki actually. And we have a lot of innovation in our economies, in the new economy. We are really early adapters and early innovators in that sense. So this is also something that should affect the EdTech ecosystem. In Sweden, Vinnova, the Innovation National Agency, they say that part of the Swedish success is that we have a long tradition of working in a triple helix situation between industries like Volvo, Ericsson, the old companies, IKEA even. So the older companies, we have this, and the tree, wood industry and everything have been working closely as an entity of the industry with government support together with academia for research. And this is one of the success factors of the Swedish economy in all sectors, except the education one is my thing. Because in education, we didn't, when it comes to EdTech, the educational technology side of it, the industry hadn't had a voice. We didn't have an organization to a neutral organization that could talk to the government or to academia on a neutral, not business-like setting. So now we have that. But I think, and I don't know if I'm conspiratorial rhetoric if I say that academia is too close to education sometimes, so it's difficult for academia to talk to the industry. When it comes to education, not when it comes to chemistry or medicine, or it's something different, something in the culture. But this is something that we wanted to achieve as a new started trade association, to see if we can find a closer collaboration between these entities, because we know that they are drivers of innovation and of growth. One example of the value network theoretical model is a researcher from the business school of Stockholm. She launched a report a couple of years ago when we started on the fintech industry in Sweden. Fintech is one of the strongest growing industries in Sweden. We have the old banking systems, but we also have Klarna, iSettle, etc., etc. We have so many large companies coming out of Sweden. And she did a study on why is fintech growing and innovating in that degree as it does. Can we find the success factors to it? And her research shows, she did a value network study, and this is a couple of companies, Spray, King, Skype, Mojang, where she could see that the older companies were giving away knowledge, sitting in each other's boards. So there was a knowledge value network where knowledge were shared. Geographical closeness was really important. But there was also a network of money shared, or investments being shared. And they were often the same people involved in that. So money and knowledge and experiences shared, and try to facilitate as many meeting places for these as possible is a success factor for growth and innovation. So this was the inspiration for something like that we want to build, because we didn't have that kind of setup in Sweden. And Sweden is a really, really small country, and the EdTech industry, the market of EdTech is really small. Some people would say it's not, but it is kind of small. And all companies starting in the Nordic countries, they need to think global. And that is one success factor of Nordic companies on a total, because they need to think global, because the end market can never be one of the Nordic markets. So they have a global perspective from start, which is a positive factor. So, but at the same time, it's very difficult to export EdTech sometimes, because it's not a global phenomenon, it's a local phenomenon. You can have some things that is easily scalable if it's not based on curricula or regulations, etc., etc. But you always have the local culture and the local regulations and local curriculums, which means that some things are really expensive to export. And in Sweden, I noticed that in Finland, they were really good at Asian connections. They understood the Asian markets much more than we did in Sweden. So they had much more know-how on that. In Norway, they were really good at the US market. So we started to connect, and I think it was Alif in Silicon Valley who connected us really from the beginning. And we started to connect and build a value network within the Nordics, and it's very loosely. We have one award that we hand out every year, but we have got together, and our companies have got together in different settings during, I think, Blair, you were one of the starters with this as well. Was it like 4 years ago or something? And we tried to do a couple of events together and stuff like that, and it has really, I think you cannot pinpoint what it has, what kind of value it has created, but it had definitely broadened all of our companies' network. And if networks are a key factor for growth and innovation, I think it's a good thing. I get happy when I get a call from a Norwegian company asking me, do you have a person who has been doing the growth journey? We need somebody in our board. that is really using your network and growing your knowledge and your investments, etc., etc. So, but it's a lot of small things that will add up. And we are very small organizations in the Nordics, limited resources, but if we had a little bit more resources, we would have one person who would operate the Nordic collaboration. But hopefully that's something that we can do. At the moment, Matt is here from Estonia. We're also working in expanding this to Europe to have not the Nordic, but trying to build tighter connections and networks with the other trade associations and communities in Europe. So we have at the moment regular meetings 1 or twice a year, and trying to formulate ourselves and what kind of missions what kinds of joint challenges we have, because the markets in Europe are so many and it's very difficult. I'm a found believer of technical international standards, very unsexy, but it's important. Matt, I know that you're interested in building a stronger startup community and building strong networks there. So we have different inputs into the future collaboration of the European EdTech Alliance, which we are calling it. So this is just an example on building value networks. As just a end is that in Sweden we are now collaborating with the National Agency for Education, with the Government for Education, and also with other stakeholders that now can have discussions with us, because we have an clearly identifiable identity as a trade association. They know what we want, and sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't, but we can always find areas where we can help each other out, because we need to do this together in different settings with policy making, etc., etc. So this was just the Nordic perspective, and Sweden is not better than the other Nordics. We're one. Oh.